With the breach of 3 levees protecting New Orleans, the landscape of the city has changed dramatically, tragically, and perhaps irreversibly. There's now over 25 feet of water where there was once city streets and thriving neighborhoods.
I hate the way they portray us in the media. If you see a black family, it says they're looting. See a white family, it says they're looking for food. And you know it's been 5 days because most of the people are black. And even for me to complain about, I would be a hypocrite because I've tried to turn away from the TV because it's too hard to watch. I've even been shopping before even giving a donation. So now I'm calling my business manager right now to see what is the biggest amount I can give, and just to imagine if I was down there, and those are my people down there. So anybody out there that wants to do anything that we can help with the setup, the way America is set up to help the poor, the black people, the less well off as slow as possible. I mean, this is Red Cross is doing everything they can. We already realize a lot of the people that could help are at war right now, fighting another way, and they've given them permission to go down and shoot us.
And subtle, but in even many ways more profoundly devastating, is the lasting damage to the survivors' will to rebuild and remain in the area. The destruction of the spirit of the people of southern Louisiana and Mississippi may end up being the most tragic loss of all.
George Bush doesn't care about black people.
Please call.
President Broussard, let me start with you. You just heard the Director of Homeland Security's explanation of what has happened this last week. What is your reaction?
We have been abandoned by our own country. Hurricane Katrina will go down in history as one of the worst storms ever to hit an American coast, but the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina will go down as one of the worst abandonments of Americans on American soil ever in U.S. history. I am personally asking our bipartisan congressional delegation here in Louisiana to immediately begin congressional hearings to find out just what happened here, why did it happen, who needs to be fired, and believe me, they need to be fired right away because we still have weeks to go in this tragedy. We have months to go. We have years to go. And whoever's at the top of this totem pole, that totem pole needs to be chainsawed off, and we've got to start with some new leadership. It's not just Katrina that caused all these deaths in New Orleans here. Bureaucracy has committed murder here in the greater New Orleans area, and bureaucracy has to stand trial before Congress now. It's so obvious. FEMA needs more congressional funding. It needs more presidential support. It needs to be a cabinet-level director. It needs to be an independent agency that will be able to fulfill its mission to work in partnership with state and local governments around America. FEMA needs to be empowered to do the things that was created to do. It needs to come somewhere like New Orleans with all of its force immediately, without red tape, without bureaucracy, act immediately with common sense and leadership, and save lives. Forget about the property. We can rebuild the property. It's got to be able to come in and save lives. We need strong leadership at the top of America right now in order to accomplish this and to reconstructing FEMA.
Mr. Broussard, let me ask, hold on, sir. Shouldn't the mayor of New Orleans and the governor of New Orleans bear some responsibility? Couldn't they have been much more forceful, much more effective, and much more organized in evacuating the area?
Sir, they were told, like me, every single day, the cavalry's coming. on a federal level, the cavalry's coming, the cavalry's coming, the cavalry's coming. I have just begun to hear the hoofs of the cavalry. The cavalry's still not here yet, but I've begun to hear the hoofs, and we're almost a week out. Let me give you just 3 quick examples. We had Walmart deliver 3 trucks of water, trailer trucks of water. FEMA turned them back. They said we didn't need them. This was a week ago. FEMA, we had 1,000 gallons of diesel fuel on a Coast Guard vessel docked in my parish. The Coast Guard said, come get the fuel right away. When we got there with our trucks, they got a word. FEMA says, don't give you the fuel. Yesterday, FEMA comes in and cuts all of our emergency communication lines. They cut them without notice. Our sheriff, Harry Lee, goes back in, he reconnects the line, he posts armed guards on our line and says no one's getting near these lines. Sheriff Harry Lee said that if American government would have responded like Walmart has responded, we wouldn't be in this crisis. But I want to thank Governor Blanco for all she's done and all her leadership. She sent in the National Guard. I just repaired a breach on my side of the 17th Street Canal that the Secretary didn't foresee, a 300-foot breach. I just completed it yesterday with convoys of National Guard and local parish workers and levee board people. It took us 2.5 days working 24/7. I just closed it. I'm telling you, most importantly, I want to thank my public employees that have worked 24/7, that burn out, the doctors, the nurses. And I want to give you one last story, and I'll shut up and let you tell me whatever you want to tell me. The guy who runs this building I'm in, emergency management, he's responsible for everything. His mother was trapped in St. Bernard Nursing Home, and every day she called him and said, are you coming, son? Is somebody coming? And he said, yeah, Mama, somebody's coming to get you. Somebody's coming to get you on Tuesday. Somebody's coming to get you on Wednesday. Somebody's coming to get you on Thursday. Somebody's coming to get you on Friday. And she drowned it Friday night. She drowned it Friday night.
Mr. President,
nobody's coming to get it. Nobody's coming to get it. The Secretary has promised. Everybody's promised. They've had press conferences. I'm sick of the press conferences. For God's sakes, shut up and send us somebody.
Just take a pause, Mr. President. While you gather yourself in your very emotional times, I understand. Let me go to Governor Haley Barbour of Mississippi. Governor Barbour, can you bring our audience up to date on what is happening in your state? How many...
Meanwhile, they survived a natural disaster, but are some Hurricane Katrina survivors now at risk from man-made dangers? We're keeping them honest, and our Sean Calebs is here now with new information about a controversy over FEMA trailers. This involves a little bit of a fight, if you will, between FEMA and the CDC.
Right. The allegation is FEMA knew pretty much right after the storm when they started putting trailers, both mobile homes and travel trailers, big difference, down in the Gulf area, and people began moving in them. It became apparent very early on that there was a possibility of formaldehyde poisoning. Now, formaldehyde is an agency that is used, an agent rather, that is used to preserve wood. Now, FEMA had an entity of the CDC called the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. Got all that? Do a study on the short-term effects of living there, because the concern was for FEMA, look, people aren't going to be living in those trailers that long. We want to find out what they're exposed to, what the dangers are, and if we need to move people out of those trailers instantly. Now, what we're looking at now, however, a congressional subcommittee, the Committee on Science and Technology, looked at the notes between FEMA and the CDC, and what congressional investigators are worried about is maybe FEMA ask the CDC to whitewash or not do a long-term study on the long-term effects of living in the FEMA trailers. FEMA says, look, that's not the case. You're talking about apples and oranges, but boy, this is just going to ratchet up the heat on FEMA. And I think more than anything, Heidi, it's an example of how poorly prepared FEMA was to provide help to that region. Everybody who lives there, I've been there more than 2 years now, knew that the big one would put tens of thousands of people out of their homes.
Yeah.
So what was the answer?
Well, I wonder, because I'm not sure I understand the difference between these travel trailers and the actual FEMA trailers that we had heard so much about, that they had so many of them just sitting around and nobody was really moving into them.
That's a great point, because a travel trailer is a thing you've seen people hook up to the back of their truck, take to the lake for a couple of days. People aren't supposed to live in those for 18 months. It's not supposed to happen. So what you had, whole families living in just a few hundred square feet. They were looking at them right now. Can you imagine a whole family living in that? So what happens? The floor buckles, you expose the plywood to people living in there. And what is an agency used to preserve that plywood? Formaldehyde. Also, the roof on something like that is supposed to be caulked periodically. People didn't get a whole lot of advice when they got the FEMA trailer. Here's the best way to take care of the trailer. So that's what we're looking at.
Wow. Well, that's a heck of a story. We will continue to follow that one alongside you. Sean Caleb's for us this morning.